So, medicine and sanitation in the Kovno Ghetto, new findings from hidden archives. In this picture here, you can see a small girl in the Kovno Ghetto Hospital. I'm honored and moved by the invitation to give this presentation to this audience. I'm not a doctor, but being a hypochondriac, I had to marry one. And I'm writing a monography about the inner life of the Kovno Ghetto community. I'm stressing the word community because they tried, and to a large extent succeeded, keeping the cohesion of being a community until the demise of the ghetto in 1944. An important part of my research will be, of course, the health and sanitary services in the ghetto between its establishment in 1941 and its obliteration in July 1944. There have been studies dealing with this topic, but as you shall see, newly researched documents from buried archives gives us a new insight, an additional layer to this important issue. Kovno, Kaunas in Lithuanian, was the interim capital of interwar Lithuania, as the current capital, Vilnius, was a Polish city. 140,000 people lived in Kovno before the war. 25% of them were Jews. Pre-war Kaunas was a major center of Jewish cultural, educational, political, religious, and economic life, including health services. The medical profession among the Jews in independent Lithuania thrived, despite the fact that they were discriminated against. 450 out of 800 doctors in Lithuania were Jewish, meaning 60% of the doctors were serving a segregated 10% of the population, showing anti-Semitism can be sometimes inherently stupid. The Jews established preventive medicine clinic run by OZE, the Society for the Protection of the Health of the Jewish Population, established in St. Petersburg back in 1912. The Gesundheitsheim Medical Center, several HMOs, Kupat Cholim, Krankenkasse, and the famous Jewish hospital Bikur Cholim, which, having existed for more than 100 years, was considered to be one of the best in the country. Kaunas was occupied by the Soviets in June 1941, June 1940, and the Germans invaded a year later in June 1941. Immediately, mass murders initiated by the Lithuanians and encouraged by the Germans took place in the city. On July 8th, this is, by the way, the Bikur Cholim Hospital as it looks today, deserted, but a fine building, 170 years old already. Perhaps and this is a picture from 1923, doctors and nurses in this hospital. The German orders the Jews to move into a ghetto across the river in a suburb of Kaunas called Viliampole, of course the Vilja by the local, by Lithuanians, and Slobodka, this is the traditional Jewish Yiddish name. 20,000 Jews moved into a crowded ghetto which was created in this neighborhood, and 12,000 of them were murdered in series of actions, culminating with the Grosse Aktion in the October 28, 1941. The Jewish Council, Ältestenrat, Council of Elders, Vad Ziknei Eda, that's how they call themselves in Hebrew, was headed by a respected and beloved physician, Dr. Elchanan Elkes, well-known pre-war physician. The main mission of the council, it turned out soon to be, was to provide the occupation authorities with an increasing number of slave laborers who were employed by various German and local employers in hard physical labors under harsh conditions. The biggest and harshest forced labor was the site in Alexotos, where a new airfield was being built a few kilometers from the ghetto. Despite the mass killings, the slave labor, in the face of looming death, the council quickly moved to assert its authority in all aspects of life, pretty much as if they were running an independent, autonomous Jewish community. Providing health services to the community was, of course, a major priority of the council. The conditions under which the health department in the ghetto functioned were appalling. Slave labor, not for persons not accustomed for doing any physical work at all. Long daily forced marches under harsh weather conditions. Lack of food, harboring and hunger. Horrid sanitary conditions, no electricity, no running water, and no sewage systems in many of the houses. Furthermore, the destruction of further medical services such as Jewish hospital, lack of medicine, X-ray machines, and conditions for treatment aggravated the situation. Despite this condition, the Jewish Council managed to establish and maintain an impressive medical service which provided medical, sanitation, and preventive health services for the community for almost 3 years. The most important pioneering work in health in East European Gotland was done, of course, by one of our hosts, my friend Dr. Miriam Offer. He is not here. Her work on health in Warsaw Ghetto and Shavli were groundbreaking. There are, however, several specific studies about the health services in Kovno Ghetto. The most comprehensive one was done by Yad Vashem's Dr. Leah Price back in 1998. Another one was done in 1986 about Leah Koren University of Tel Aviv about nursing as part of the health services in the ghettos of Warsaw, Vilnius, and Kaunas. Those researches were mainly based on memoirs and testimonies given by survivors of the ghetto, as well as a few documents which were associated in Leah Price's case with the famous diary of Ambulatory surviving the Holocaust. They were not aware of the existence of the buried archive of the ghetto, which had already been discovered back in 1964, but they were not published at the time of these research. They were not released to major research institutions until the year 2000. So I'm talking about it. Most of them in my key holder. The secret archive of the Kovno Ghetto contained documents dating from July 1941 until the end of 1943. They were maintained by officers of the Jewish police and prepared in advance for concealment in case its keeper were detained by the Germans. This took place indeed during the horrible Kinderaktion on the night of March 27, 1944. The archives were buried underground by resistance activists and forgotten. They were accidentally unearthed only in 1964 and released to major research institute Yad Vashem Yivu and the Holocaust Museum in Washington only after the establishment of independent Lithuania. A major document in this archives was the Geschichte von der jüdischen Viliampole Ghetto Polizei, the history of the Jewish ghetto police, which was edited and published under the edition of Dalia Offer here last year in edition Yad Vashem. Excellent and fascinating and unique book, but this I'm not going to talk about. The archives contained about approximately 30,000 documents dealing with almost all the entire range of Jewish life in the ghetto. There are examples here. This is the last roll call of the police. A few minutes after that, they were arrested, and on the same night, the archives were buried. In most cases, Holocaust historians have two types of sources at their disposal: documents of the perpetrators and those written by the victims. Documents of the perpetrators, the German in most cases, have documents, letters, diaries, and photos. And the documents of the victims, photos, memoirs, testimonies, and diaries, rarely we can find actual documents from that period. Maybe the reason I chose to conduct my research on this topic is the existence of this fascinating archives, which gives us an additional layer, official ghetto archives. And we have a two-way relationships that is reflected in those archives between the ghettos and the occupiers, decrees, order, and actions coming from the Germans to and reports, appeals, and letters in the other direction. direct contact between the ghetto and the inmates, the population. And what is most unique is the obvious attempt by the archivists to talk to the future historian. Dalia talks about it extensively in the introduction to her book. There are a lot of medical records in this, and this is what I'm going to talk about. There are health department records, medical personnel lists, hospital records, demographic records, which can allow us to reconstruct the mortality rates and the number of sick people and the diagnosis on each week, sometimes on each day. Sanitation, preventive medicine documents, and documents about pregnancy termination. We shall start by the health report on. The documents are in 3 languages. Many of them in Yiddish, many of them are in Lithuanian, and some of them are in German. Let's begin by the detailed report written by the health department of the ghetto, led by the famous Dr. Benjamin Zacharin, at the end of 1942, describing the development of medical services between August 1941 and May 1942. The report was written in Yiddish. This is significant, usually indicated it was not meant to be scrutinized either by Lithuanians or by the Germans. This is the introduction. We say we have a ghetto, a spital, 2 ambulatorios, a clinic, an aptek, a bod, an Entleusung, Wäscherei. Sorry, I switched. Hospital, 2 ambulatories, a clinic, a public bath, a delousing facility, and a laundry. The labor department, which was responsible for the slave labor, had a separate health services, giving medical treatment for forced laborers, mainly in the aerodrome. The report says that the efforts to provide health services to the inhabitants are hampered because of lack of food, proper clothing, and heating facilities. This is statistics about the visits of ghetto residents to the ambulatories. It's not the hospital, not the clinic, which is kind of a daycare, hospitalization. It was a daily clinic. We see inner crank, inner meditation, nerve, chirurgy, Freud, gynecology, ophthalmology as a function of the date, and then you add to that the dentist, and altogether the details. These are impressive numbers. In June 1942, for example, the total number of visitations reaches 9,177. We see here. The total population of the ghetto at that time was 17,000 people. So more than half, of course, some people visited the clinics more than once, but more than half, it's a very impressive and high number. 1941. 41 to 42, August 41 to August 42. Second table, we see the different medical occupations. How many people working in the clinics? Doctorium, Sen doctorium is dentist, accoucherinis is midwives, felchers is a felcher, Schwester, sisters, and etc. And we see a gradual decrease in the number of doctors with an increase with the number of visits. Third one is an example of statistics of, still we have to analyze and get some sense out of it. The laboratory tests carried in the ghetto. What laboratory tests and how many? Impressive number. This is an increasing, an interesting table. One, health services to the slave laborers. These are services that were given in the field. The doctors, 22 doctors, served only the slave laborers. Some of them were had to walk 4 kilometers one way or back each day with the laborers to the field. And we see how they treated those. And we have 22 doctors, 15 of them in the Flugfeld, in the aerodrome, and 7 back. What they do in the ghetto, they treat those, because of the very harsh conditions, who became too ill to work. And they were giving him, to my Israeli friend, gimelim, sick leaves. And we have the statistics of the sick leaves. Urlauben für Flugplatzarbeiter zu Liebkrankheiten durch der Doktorenkommission. And it's an impressive number. I made a calculation that each slave laborer got, on the average, 3 gimelim, 3 days off sick leave per month, which is an interesting situation. Who were the doctors in the ghetto? We're moving. Sorry, this is a preliminary sanitation statistics about visit to the bath, the entlousing from lice, and which was established a little bit later. Now, I need to come to this. This is an interesting slide. There were pogroms, people lost their lives, people lost their families, some people lost their documents. You had to work between the age of 16 to 55, later 12 to 65. And if you didn't have a document, how do they know? On the other hand, it's very nice not to work. On the other hand, if you're not working, you are maybe sent to be killed. So there's a document about setting up of a commission to determine people's age if they didn't have the documents. I am 14. Do you look 14? Do you look 18? Who are the medical personnel in the ghetto? I found dozens of pages which listing all the doctors, nurses, pharmacists, all the medical for example, this is the first page, the internal medicine doctor list. This is Lithuanian. We have Aronovich used Jokubas, which is Yakov Aronovich, Arolanskas Dovidas, which is Duvid Arolinsky, and the address, and this list, and Chana Bershina, which is Chana Barash, an internal medicine doctor. I will not bother you with all the long list, but I compiled a summary table, which I think gives us a very interesting insight. We see here the professions, the men, women, and the total. And the very surprising for me figure is here. 32% of the doctors in the ghetto, of all professions, were women. A very, very high number. If we compare it for the fact that, for example, in 1949, only 5% of American students going to medical schools were women. Of course, all the midwives and nurses, and a large percent of the pharmacists were women, but the high percentage of women in the doctor is surprising. There are also private clinics, by the way. Another surprising finding that I find was, I made a calculation about the rate of the number of doctors per 1,000 population. This is the common number by which you measure. In the United States, we have 2.7. In Israel, it's 3.7. In the ghetto, there are more than 10. I mean, the highest concentration of doctors per capita that I've seen anywhere. We can talk about it. Now we go to a third topic here, the Sanitary Commission. In 1942 was an outbreak of typhus in the ghetto. Interestingly enough, there is no trace of that in the archives. It's not mentioned. It only mentions in memoirs of doctors. It's not in the archives on purpose because they tried and managed to hide the existence of this outbreak from the Germans. There were at least 70 people were treated for typhus, but only 3 of them died, 4.3%. Furthermore, in mid-1942 was a commission sent by the German from the city of Lithuania to check the health conditions in the ghetto. We have the report of the commission. They say nothing about. While the commission was there, it was in the middle of the outbreak. They hid the people in the houses. They didn't find a single one of them, and it's not mentioned in the report. Only minor things are mentioned in the report. So they decided to form a commission comprised of doctors and police officers, and they made a working plan of 4 phases. They had 30 meetings throughout the year and daily inspections. They were empowered to arrest people, confiscate property and foodstuff, close down businesses or fire persons from their jobs if they found the conditions. The first priority was to establish good sanitary conditions in all places dealing with foodstuffs, such as bakeries, the few manufacturing facilities for salt, pepper, things like that, butcheries and grocery shops. The second priority was all public establishments, mainly places such as the public bath, the laundry, police stations, and the ghetto prison. Then came sanitary inspections of each and every flat, and the last priority was to ensure good sanitary conditions in the streets and public places. Inspections were carried out daily throughout the whole year of 1943. Police regulation was written detailing what sanctions could be imposed upon violators first time, second time. Daily, teams of the Sanitary Commission comprising of police officers and medical personnel went from house to house, from one bakery to the other, checking the conditions. Serious or fleeting offenders were punished. This is the order to establish the ghetto. This is the working plan, detailed working plan of how the commission is working. And this is a report which the Sanitary Commission would issue to somebody who was, sorry, this is something totally different. They had another mission. If during the visit they found some beds which are not used, or cushions or things, or furniture that they can give to the needy, they could take it away from the confiscated and transfer it to the poor, and this is a confiscation act here. Now I come to an interesting and rather interesting document. I don't know if those of you doctors maybe heard of a famous incident in the history of medicine, Typhoid Mary. Anyone heard about Typhoid Mary? Typhoid Mary was a woman in New York in the beginning of the 20th century. He was a carrier of typhus but not sick himself, and her profession was a cook. And every house that she worked in, she remained healthy, but all the inhabitants of the house died. Maybe stayed alive, but they all caught a horrible disease. They arrested it. There was a habeas corpus, a big scandal 100 and something years ago. So here we're talking about, I will call him Syphilis Moshe. I hid his last name and his address for confidentiality reason. He was found to be a carrier of venereal disease. I'm not a doctor. I'm not sure that under normal conditions and venereal disease could be transferred through a loaf of bread, but they decided to fire him temporarily. He was forced to undergo treatment and then come to the police station with a report of he had a treatment, and he was forbidden from going back to work until he recovered. Second item here, they changed the quality of the bread. Wasserprozent in the Brot von der Ghetto-Bäckereien. The water content, the acidity, the pH, and other parameters which shows sometimes one report says this bread went under all inspection, but the taste is awful. Gewicht norm is the weight. If it's any loaf of bread, 2 kilograms, you have to be not more than 2% under the. Another set of records I'm not going to show you, hospital records. The names of patients, diagnosis, and lengths of stay, they're all handwritten in German. Do you remember the myth before the computer age that all handwriting of doctors is undecipherable? It was done in purpose so the patient wouldn't know what the doctor is writing about him, and only pharmacists could decipher it. In this case, it's not a myth. Totally indecipherable as of this stage. One day, hopefully, I will be able. The last document I'm going to send you reflects a very sad event in the history of the ghetto. That was the cruel German decree to terminate pregnancy in the ghetto. The decree was issued by the infamous Nazi war criminal Helmut Raucher in May 1942 and reaffirmed 2 months later. The document I'm showing you here, this is Ihrem Wunsch gewesen ist und wo es Ihnen Bericht über die ältesten getroffenen Maßnahmen betroffene Schwägenschaften im Ghetto. In German, long German words, you have to take a schwung before you reach the end of the word. So this is the document here. Significantly, again, it is in English because they wanted the German to know what measures they are taking to fulfill their decree. The head of the council, Dr. Elkes, instructs the police and health office to establish joint teams that will carry out the order. What is written here is that pregnancies in the age of 9 months are allowed to be carried out to completion. It's an interesting story how they squeezed this easing of the order from the Germans. Pregnancies in early months had to be terminated, either in the ghetto hospital or by private doctors. Teams of police officers and midwives were established. They had to visit all apartments of the ghetto, advise the inhabitants of the decree, teach them how to use contraceptives, and arrange for abortions if necessary. To sum up, in this short time frame, I've been only able to show you a small sample of the health-related documents that exist in the archives. I think I have been able to show you the importance of the document to additional layer to the current research. Being an engineer in my background, I like number and statistics, and I think I could do a quantitative analysis with those numbers, which will add to the only descriptive analysis of the history of the medicine in the ghetto so far. I hope to bring this research to a conclusion. And if any of you would like to help me in advice or in deciphering those horrible German hospital records, I'll be more than happy. I thank you all for listening.